Papua New Guinea. But at the rate we're going, in 20 years, there will not be a large intact forest left on the planet. We've used air, water, and soil as a toxic dump. Even in Moncton, every one of you is filled with dozens of different toxic chemicals and more than a pound of plastic dissolved in your bodies. Climate change is happening, and it's being caused by human use of fossil fuels. That is scientifically incontrovertible, despite the enormous effort by the fossil fuel industry to tell us otherwise. So here we are, as a species, very, very clever, but without the humility to recognize there are limits, and we don't know enough to manage the entire biosphere. So where do we go from here? I think the first thing we better sit down and answer is, what is life all about? My great hero, my teacher, my mentor was my father. And in 1994, when he was 85, he was dying of cancer. Thank goodness it wasn't painful. He knew it. He was prepared for it. I was amazed. He had no fear of death. I moved in to live with him for the last month of his life. And that was one of the happiest times I had with my father. He was never a rich man. But he said to me over and over, "David, I die a rich man." We laughed and cried. We pored over scrapbooks. We talked and talked. And every night my wife would come over with our children and show slides of trips that we took with my dad. In all that time I lived with him, he never once said, "David, do you remember that closet full of fancy clothes I had?" He never said, "You remember that 1987 car I bought, or the big house that we owned in London, Ontario?" All we talked about were family, friends, neighbors, and the things that we did together. That was my father's wealth. And in those things he was truly a wealthy man. Somehow we've got off on some weird tangent, thinking having more stuff and bigger stuff and newer stuff is what life is all about. But my father showed me it's about people and what we do together. My wife and I live in a wonderful part of Vancouver. We've lived there for 35 years. We have a house right on the water in Vancouver. And in 1990s, before Hong Kong reverted to China, I got a letter from a real estate agent saying, "Offshore money is pouring into Vancouver. Now is a good time to sell your house and buy up." I'd never heard the expression "buy up" before. I didn't know my home was something that was just an investment and that I sell it when I can in order to get a better, bigger place. I have to admit, I was very pissed off to get this letter. So I said, okay, if I was to put my home on the market, what would I list as the things that make it valuable to me? And the first thing I listed was the fact that when we bought this house, my wife's mother and father moved into the apartment above our downstairs. So my children have had grandma and granddad upstairs all their lives. And I wrote that down as one of the most valuable things about that house. My father was a carpenter, and when Tara and I were first married, he built a kitchen cabinet for our apartment. When we bought this house, I tore out that cabinet and put it in our kitchen. Looks like hell, but every time I use that kitchen cabinet, my father is there. And I put that down as something of great value. I was building a fence along the water side, and my best friend came out from Toronto and stayed with us for a week. And he spent hours carving a handle to go on that gate. And every time I open that gate, I think of my best friend. And I put that down as something of value. My children over the years have dragged countless dead snakes and birds and squirrels killed on the streets and created an animal cemetery under our dogwood tree. And I put that down as something valuable. My father-in-law planted a clematis plant along the fence. And every year when that beautiful purple flower emerges from that plant, I had put my mother's ashes on there, and my niece, when she died unexpectedly, we put some of Janice's ashes on there. Every year when I see that plant blossom, I know that my mother and Janice are there. And I put that down. And as I looked over that list, I realized those are the things that have made my house my home. Those, to us, are priceless. And yet, on the market, they are worthless. And I think about Aboriginal people around the world who view the earth as our mother. How do you put a market price on your mother? Who think of those things as rocks and rivers and forests and soil as sacred. How do you put a price on something that is sacred? And that's the problem when we put the economy as our highest priority and try to evaluate everything through the economy. Those things that matter most to us have no value in this economic system. And somehow we've got off, I believe, on the wrong tangent, and we've got to get onto a different road. At this stage in my life, whatever governments or corporations do or do not do will have very little effect on my life. I'm in the death zone. But what they do or do not do will reverberate through the lives of our children and our grandchildren. My generation and the boomers that followed have lived like kings and queens. We partied as if there is no tomorrow. And we forgot to think about our ancestors and of generations yet to come. Well, the party's over. It's time to sober up, clean up the mess, and work toward a future that we can dream into being. We've done it in the past, and I believe we can do it again. So what then is the challenge? First of all, slow down. What the hell's the hurry? I realize this at my life. We're all going to fall off the end at the end and die. What the hell's the hurry? Get to know your neighbors. Think about your children. And then reimagine the future. You see, our great ability was imagination. We could imagine the world yet to come. And once we imagined it, we could work now towards achieving it. That was what we did since the beginning of our species. Imagine a world where we live, work, and play in the same area so that we don't need a car because all the action and fun is going right out there in front of our homes. Imagine every building and road capturing all the sunlight that falls on it and converting it into electricity, while every roof captures water and grows food. Imagine cities filled with orchards of fruit and nut trees and local gardens where we celebrate the seasons through the food as it matures through the year. Imagine extracting heat from the earth in the winter and putting heat back into the earth in the summer. Imagine communities self-sufficient in food, energy, and water, where disposability is no longer an acceptable word. When someone says, I've got a disposable, you cover your children's ears and say, don't listen to that awful person, he just said a very naughty word. Where garbage and sewage become opportunities for endless recycling through biological processes. Imagine cancer and asthma rates plummeting as we stop putting toxics into our surroundings. Imagine zero production of wastes because we design industrial systems like nature, where one organism's waste is another species' opportunity. Imagine being able to drink the water out of any river or lake, as I did in Canada when I was a boy. Imagine catching a fish and eating it without first consulting a book telling you what chemicals are in it and how much you can eat every week. Imagine Canada covered in forests that we can log forever because we're doing it the right way. Imagine lighter than airships that carry enormous payloads, carry supplies or carry people over to isolated areas or as tourists across the land with very little emissions. Imagine an economy that is in balance with nature's productive capacity and incorporates nature's services. I could go on and on. I've only hinted at some of the possibilities. I described them in a book I wrote called Good News for a Change, and then I wrote another book called More Good News that is filled with examples. These are not pie-in-the-sky ideas like carbon capture and storage. These are actually going on right now, being applied in different places in different ways. Let us dream of what is possible so we can come together then and put our efforts behind a common goal. And then let us show what a magnificent species we truly are. And let me end with a famous quote from Goethe, just to remind you. Until one is committed, there is great hesitance, the chance to draw back. The moment one definitely commits, then providence comes too. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. Whatever you do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. Thank you. Thank you, Moncton. Thank you.
Dr. Suzuki is going to sign some more books for a while. Thank you, sir. Your leadership, vision, and insight are exemplary and are an enormous contribution to creating a better, greener, more sustainable Canada and beyond. Thank you, everyone, for your presence here today. We invite you to visit with our exhibitors and take in some of the valuable information they have to present. And as I said, Dr. Suzuki will spend a bit more time signing some books. Thanks.